Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a topic that, well, it touches every single one of our lives, whether we realize it or not. Habits. We're going to unpack some really profound insights from a groundbreaking book exploring how tiny, almost imperceptible changes can lead to truly monumental results, results that almost seem to defy logic sometimes.
That's absolutely right. We're sifting through pages of research, lots of real-world examples, and some incredibly actionable strategies to really understand the very fabric of human behavior. Our mission for you today really is to extract the core wisdom on how habits get formed, how they actually work, and maybe most importantly, how you can leverage them to fulfill your potential, no matter where you're starting from. We really want to give you a complete, easy-to-understand breakdown of, well, every crucial idea.
Yeah, think of this as your shortcut to truly understanding why some people seem to achieve so much with, seemingly less effort, while others struggle despite their best intentions. We're talking about a practical blueprint for continuous improvement built on the smallest, most fundamental units of behavior. Things you can start applying in your own life, like right away.
Exactly. We'll delve into the author's own really compelling journey from a devastating injury to major athletic success. We'll look at the surprising power of these tiny gains that just accumulate exponentially over time. We'll get into the intricate science behind why our brains crave certain actions and practical step-by-step methods. Things like designing your environment and your mindset for lasting change. What truly stands out to you when you reflect on your own daily routines? How much of it just feels like it's running on autopilot? We're about to illuminate those hidden forces at play and hopefully give you the tools to take back some control. Nunco. The power of tiny gains.
Yep.
Why small changes make a big difference.
Okay, let's untap this with a foundational idea from our source material. The author, James Clear, he starts by sharing his own really profound experience, recovering from this devastating baseball bat injury back in high school. And we're talking multiple skull fractures, a broken nose, shattered eye sockets. He was even in a coma. It was really severe. Yet somehow, a decade later, he transforms himself into the top male athlete at his university and an academic All-American. So how did this incredible transformation actually happen, especially from such a brutal starting point?
It's a really striking story, isn't it? And what's remarkable, what really jumps out is that his recovery and, his later success, they weren't due to one single heroic effort. It wasn't like one grand burst of motivation that just carried him through. He actually attributes it directly to relying on small, consistent habits, little things, day after day. And this brings us to a core concept, a philosophy he calls the aggregation of marginal gains, which is basically this relentless commitment to searching for a tiny, tiny margin of improvement in, well, everything you do. No detail was too small to consider. No aspect of his life was left unexamined for, like a potential 1% tweak.
That's a powerful idea. And it immediately brings to mind that famous example, the British cycling team. Our source material mentions this for over a century. British riders were, well, pretty mediocre. Since 1908, they'd only won a single gold medal at the Olympics, and no British cyclist had ever won the Tour de France in 110 years. Can you imagine? Their performance was apparently so underwhelming that one of Europe's top bike manufacturers refused to sell them bikes. They were afraid it would hurt their brand if other pros saw the Brits using their gear. Then this new performance director, Dave Brailsford, he comes in and implements this exact strategy of marginal gains. What did that look like in practice? I mean, it must have been more than just tinkering with the bikes, right?
Oh, absolutely. Brailsford believed that if you broke down everything involved in riding a bike, and really more broadly, everything involved in an athlete's life, and improved each tiny component by just 1%, then the cumulative effect would be massive, significant. And yeah, it wasn't just about the high-tech gear. It meant small adjustments across the board. Things like redesigning bike seats to be more ergonomic, more comfortable, optimizing tire grip for different surfaces, having riders wear electrically heated overshorts to keep their muscle temperature just right between rides, even using biofeedback sensors to monitor performance in real time. But they also focused on the really mundane stuff too, like experimenting with different massage gels for faster recovery, teaching mechanics and riders proper hand-washing techniques to avoid getting sick. They even figured out the best pillow and mattress for each individual rider to optimize their sleep quality. Seriously, no stone was left unturned in that hunt for tiny gains.
And the results were just astounding, weren't they? It really sounds like those small, seemingly insignificant improvements genuinely added up to something huge.
Absolutely incredible. Within just 5 years of Brailsford starting this, British cycling didn't just get a bit better. They completely dominated the sport. It was a total turnaround.
So in 2008 at the Beijing Olympics, they won something like 60% of the available gold medals in track cycling. Just amazing. Then 4 years later, London Olympics, they set 9 Olympic records and 7 world records. And the Tour de France, which they'd never, ever won, Bradley Wiggins won it, their first ever victory. Then Chris Froome won it the very next year. Over a 10-year stretch from 2007 to 2017, British cyclists won 178 world championships, 66 Olympic or Paralympic gold medals, plus 5 Tour de France victories. Just,
Oh, wow.
yeah, wow, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How can a mere 1% improvement really transform outcomes that much? How does it create that kind of dominance? The simple math, actually, as the author explains it, reveals something quite astonishing.
Right. And that's where the idea really clicks, I think, because if you can manage to get just 1% better each day for a whole year, you don't just become 365% better, which, would be impressive enough. No, you end up a staggering 37 times better than when you started. It's this exponential curve where these tiny daily improvements compound into massive, almost unbelievable growth over time. And conversely, if you get 1% worse each day for a year, well, you decline almost down to zero. What starts as just a small win or maybe a minor setback, it accumulates into something much, much more profound. It's exactly like compounding interest in finance, but it's working on your habits, your skills, your personal growth.
And this highlights a really critical insight that our author emphasizes. Your outcomes, the results you see, are actually a lagging measure of your habits. They reflect the past, not necessarily the present effort. Think about it, right? Your net worth isn't usually a reflection of one big financial decision you made yesterday. It's a lagging measure of your daily financial habits, how you save, how you spend, how you invest, day in, day out. Your weight isn't just about the meal you ate last night. It's a lagging measure of your eating and exercise habits over weeks and months. Your knowledge. It's a lagging measure of your learning habits. The clutter in your house, a lagging measure of your cleaning habits. You truly get what you repeat, not just what you do occasionally. So therefore, your current trajectory, the direction your daily habits are actually taking you, that's far more important than your current results. Are you spending less than you earn each month? Are you consistently getting to the gym each week? Are you reading books, learning something new each day? Those are the real indicators of where you're headed.
So, what does all this mean for you listening right now? Well, it means focusing on your daily choices, those seemingly tiny battles you engage in every single day, because those are the ones that will ultimately define your future self.
Yeah.
It's not about these grand one-time transformations or trying to achieve success overnight. That rarely works. It's about the consistent, often imperceptible application of daily habits that over time will multiply the margin between where you are now and where you want to be. It's really about letting time work for you, not against you. The plateau of latent potential, understanding delayed outcomes. It's so natural for us, isn't it, to expect progress to be linear. When we put in effort, we want to see results, like right away. Proportionate results. We often think, okay, I put in X amount of effort, so I should see Y amount of progress, immediately. But our source points out that reality is quite different. It's actually not uncommon at all to feel like you're putting in a ton of effort without seeing any tangible results for days, weeks, sometimes even months. And this can lead to what the author calls the valley of disappointment, where people just feel incredibly discouraged. They think their efforts are being wasted. It's that awful feeling of, man, I've been working so hard at this, but nothing seems to be changing. So how do we keep the faith when we're stuck in that frustrating valley, when every fiber of our being is telling us to just give up because we're not seeing immediate change?
That's such a crucial question, and it's something I think everyone experiences when they're trying to build new habits or learn a new skill. We call this phenomenon the plateau of latent potential. To illustrate this delay, think about an ice cube melting. Imagine it's sitting on a table in a cold room, say it's currently 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, ever so slowly, the room starts to heat up. 26 degrees, 27, 28, the ice cube, still solid. 29 degrees, 30, 31, still solid ice. Then, almost instantly, the moment it hits 32 degrees, it starts to melt. Now, all those previous temperature increases from 25 up to 31 degrees, they weren't wasted, right? The energy was simply being stored, quietly building up, accumulating beneath the surface. It just hadn't hit the threshold yet.
Okay. So your consistent work, even when it feels completely unrewarded, isn't wasted at all. It's just being stored up, like that temperature rising in the room, until it finally hits some kind of critical point.
Exactly. That's the absolute essence of the plateau of latent potential. And when you finally do break through this plateau, when your personal ice cube hits that 32-degree mark and the visible change finally occurs, well, people around you, maybe even you yourself, might call it overnight success.
They see the dramatic event, right? The sudden breakthrough, the moment of transformation. But in reality, it's the culmination, the result of all that consistent, seemingly unrewarded effort from before. It's kind of like the human equivalent of geological pressure silently building up for millennia until boom, an earthquake finally happens. The work you were diligently doing way back when it seemed like you weren't making any visible progress at all, that is precisely what makes the breakthrough today possible. It's the unseen foundation under every single leap forward.
This really explains why it's so incredibly hard to build habits that actually last. We make these small changes, we stick with them for a little while, we don't see those immediate results we crave, we fall into that valley of disappointment, and then we give up thinking, "Ugh, this just isn't working." You hear it all the time, like, I've been running every single day for a month, so why can't I see any change in my body or, on the scale? How do we manage that frustration? And maybe more importantly, how do we keep going when we hit that invisible wall?
Well, the key is really a combination of persistence and, maybe even more importantly, patience, coupled with a shift in perspective. You have to keep going. Habits simply need to continue long enough to break through that plateau. You have to sort of internalize the understanding that the most powerful, the most significant outcomes are very often delayed. Your consistent small actions, they're always accumulating, always building, always storing energy, even when you can't see the immediate payoff right in front of you. Think of a bamboo tree, right? For its first 5 years, it barely seems to grow at all. It looks like nothing is happening above ground. But underneath, it's developing this incredible, complex root system. Then suddenly, in its 6th year, it can shoot up 90 feet in just 6 weeks. The growth was happening all along, just beneath the surface, unseen. So this shifts your focus from fixating on immediate results to trusting the underlying system you're building. It's less about the goal itself right now and more about faithfully continuing the journey through that plateau, knowing, trusting that the breakthrough is coming if you just keep putting in the reps. Goals, systems, and identity. Shifting your focus.
Okay, so now our source moves into a really interesting distinction, one that fundamentally impacts, well, pretty much everything we do, the difference between goals and systems. Most of us, we're taught from a young age to set big, ambitious goals. Things like, I want to lose 30 pounds or I want to run a successful business. We focus on the outcome, but the books suggest that the soul, maybe unexamined focus on goals, can actually be problematic. Why is that? What's the sort of hidden downside to being purely outcome-oriented?
That's a great point, and it really challenges conventional wisdom. We connect this to the bigger picture. Goals are indeed about the results you want to achieve, like winning that championship or building that million-dollar business, the destination. Systems, on the other hand, are all about the processes, the daily practices, the strategies, the underlying workflows that actually lead to those results. The journey, if you will. Now, the problem with an exclusive, rigid focus just on goals is multifaceted, but our author really highlights 2 critical issues. First, problem 1. Winners and losers often have the exact same goals. Think about it. Every athlete wants to win the championship, right? Every entrepreneur wants to build a successful business. Every candidate wants to win the election. The goal itself doesn't differentiate the people who achieve it from those who don't. What truly differentiates them is the system of daily practices, how they recruit players, how they manage coaches, how they conduct practice, or, in business, how they test product ideas, how they hire employees, refine marketing, run their outreach. So, if successful and unsuccessful people share the exact same goals, then clearly the goals themselves cannot be the primary factor that differentiates their outcomes. It has to be the system. The system is the real differentiator. Second, problem 2. Achieving a goal is often only a momentary change. It's temporary. Imagine you have a perpetually messy room and you set a goal. Clean the room. Okay, if you summon the energy, you tidy up, you achieve the goal. You have clean room for now. But if you maintain the exact same sloppy habits that led to a messy room in the first place, leaving clothes on the floor, not putting dishes away immediately, well, pretty soon you'll be looking at a new pile of clutter and hoping for another burst of motivation to hit you. You end up just chasing the same outcome over and over again because you never actually changed the underlying system that produced the mess. You basically treated a symptom without ever addressing the root cause. Achieving a goal only changes your life for that moment. Lasting, sustainable change requires changing your fundamental systems.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So if goals are about the symptoms, then systems are about the cause. And this implies we should, fall in love with the process, the journey itself, rather than just fixating on the destination or the final product. That feels almost counterintuitive to how we're often trained to think.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it is counterintuitive at first. But adopting a systems-first mentality means you don't have to wait for the big outcome to feel satisfied or successful.
You can be satisfied anytime your system is running. If your system is, say, to write 500 words a day, you can experience a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction right after those words are written, regardless of whether the book is published yet or becomes a bestseller down the line. If your system is to exercise for 30 minutes, you can feel successful the moment that workout is done. And a robust system, importantly, can lead to success in many different forms, not just the one specific outcome you initially envisioned. This offers incredible flexibility and allows for sustained happiness along the way. It also helps avoid mentally boxing yourself into this very narrow version of happiness that might turn out to be misguided anyway. Your actual path through life might not match the exact rigid journey you had in mind. Right? So an adaptable, thriving system is far more effective and, frankly, less prone to disappointment.
This whole concept of embracing systems rather than just goals, it leads us to what our source suggests is the most profound and the most powerful level of change.
Yeah.
Identity. The book strongly suggests that true, lasting behavior change isn't just about what you do, but fundamentally about who you become. What does that mean in like practical, everyday terms?
Yeah, this is truly where the deep work happens. It's one thing to say, I want to be a writer. That's an outcome-based goal, right? It focuses on the result of writing a book. It's another thing entirely much more powerful, much more sustainable to say, I am a writer. That's identity-based. It focuses on the type of person you are or are becoming. The core idea here is that your habits are deeply intrinsically tied to your self-image. The more pride you have in a particular aspect of your identity, the more motivated you'll naturally be to maintain the habits associated with it. Like if you're really proud of how your hair looks, you'll naturally develop all sorts of habits to care for it, right? If you're proud of the size of your biceps, you'll make damn sure you never skip an upper body workout. Once your pride gets involved, once that habit becomes intertwined with who you see yourself as, you'll fight tooth and nail to maintain it. Because maintaining it affirms your very sense of self. It feels good.
Wow. So you're not just trying to have a habit like, I want to run a marathon. You're actively trying to become the type of person who embodies that habit, like I am a runner. That feels incredibly powerful. But how do you reconcile that with our natural human tendency to focus on outcomes? Is it just a mental trick? Or is there a tangible difference in how you approach setting goals when your focus shifts from outcome to identity?
Well, it's definitely not just a mental trick. It's a profound shift in mindset that has very tangible effects on your behavior. Your identity doesn't just sort of appear out of thin air. It actually emerges from your habits. Each action you take is, in a very real sense, a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Every time you write a page, you're casting a vote for I am a writer. Every time you go to the gym, you're casting a vote for I am an athlete. Every time you choose a healthy meal, that's a vote for I am a healthy eater. Over time, these votes accumulate, right? And your identity begins to shift. It starts to solidify. And then, crucially, it reinforces the very behaviors that created it in the first place. It becomes a positive feedback loop. So the most effective way to change your habits, therefore, is not to focus primarily on what you want to achieve, but rather on who you wish to become. Your behavior becomes an undeniable reflection of your evolving identity, the science of how habits work. The habit loop.
Okay, so to really understand how to build better habits, and maybe just as importantly, how to break free from the less desirable ones, we need to dive into the underlying science. Our source breaks down habit formation into 4 simple steps: cue, craving, response, and reward. And this forms a continuous feedback loop, running endlessly, often without us even realizing it's happening. Can you walk us through each stage of this habit loop and explain how it actually drives our daily actions?
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this simple 4-step pattern is the fundamental backbone of every single habit we have, and operates largely without our conscious awareness, which is why habits are so powerful. Your brain runs through these steps in the exact same order every single time, often in just a split second. This allows you to create these automatic habits and conserve precious mental energy for more complex tasks. So first, there's the cue. This is the trigger. It's the bit of information that basically alerts your brain to initiate a particular behavior. And cues are often subtle. Think of an obvious cue, like seeing food when you're genuinely hungry. But cues can also be the sound of a notification on your phone, right? Or the vibration of your phone in your pocket. Or even internal cues, like a feeling of anxiety, boredom, or stress. Our prehistoric ancestors paid close attention to cues signaling primary rewards, things essential for survival, like food, water, shelter. Today, we learn cues that predict secondary rewards like money, fame, praise, approval, or even just a sense of personal satisfaction. Your mind is constantly, unconsciously analyzing your internal and external environment for these cues, always scanning, trying to identify what might bring a reward. Second is the craving. This is the motivational force behind every single habit. It's the anticipation, the desire for the reward, the urge to change your internal state. And this is a really crucial distinction the author makes. You don't actually crave the habit itself. You crave the feeling or the change in state it provides. For instance, you don't crave the physical act of smoking a cigarette. You crave the feeling of stress relief or relaxation that it predicts it will deliver. You don't necessarily want to check your phone constantly. You crave the mental stimulation or social connection it predicts you might receive. This deep-seated desire, this wanting, this anticipation is precisely what gets us to act, and it's fueled primarily by the neurotransmitter dopamine.
That's fascinating about craving. It makes so much sense that our brains are maybe hardwired for wanting even more than liking. How exactly does dopamine fit into this? And why is its role in anticipation so critical for habit formation?
Yeah, it's incredibly important because, as the author explains, habits are essentially a dopamine-driven feedback loop. And what's truly striking here is that dopamine's primary role is actually about anticipation and desire, not just the experience of pleasure itself, which is kind of counterintuitive. This was famously shown in experiments, like ones with rats, where their dopamine pathways were blocked. What happened? They completely lost all will to live. They became entirely unmotivated. Now, if food was put directly into their mouths, they would still like it. They'd show pleasurable reactions. But they wouldn't want it. They wouldn't exert any effort whatsoever to get it. Without dopamine, desire just died and action stopped completely. Conversely, when researchers flooded the reward system with dopamine, other experiments showed mice developing such a strong craving that they'd consume vast quantities of food even without receiving any actual rewarding stimulation. Their brains were focused entirely on the pursuit, the wanting. So the key insight here is that dopamine is released not primarily when you experience pleasure, but when you anticipate it. The greater the anticipation of a reward, the bigger the dopamine spike, and the more motivated we are to take action. This is why just thinking about Christmas morning can often feel better than actually opening the gifts, or why daydreaming about a vacation can sometimes be more enjoyable than actually being on it. Our brains allocate far more neural circuitry for wanting rewards than for simply liking them. And this explains why behaviors associated with higher predicted dopamine levels, things like taking drugs, eating junk food, endless scrolling on social media, are so incredibly habit-forming. It's the powerful promise of pleasure that constantly pulls us in. Okay, third in the loop is the response. This is the actual habit you perform. It can be an internal thought, like imagining a future scenario, or it could be an external action, like going for a run or checking email. Now, whether a response actually occurs depends on two key factors: how motivated you are, driven by that craving, and how much friction or effort is associated with the behavior. If an action requires too much physical or mental effort, you're just unlikely to do it consistently. Your ability also plays a significant role, obviously. You can only perform a habit if you're physically and mentally capable of it. You can't dunk a basketball if you can't jump high enough, no matter how much you crave the applause or the feeling of success. And finally, the response delivers a reward. This is the end goal of every habit, and rewards serve two really crucial purposes. First, they satisfy your craving, bringing that moment of contentment, relief, or pleasure. The food delivers energy, the promotion brings money and respect, getting in shape improves health and confidence, etc. Second, and perhaps even more importantly for locking in the habit, rewards teach your brain which actions are worth remembering and repeating in the future. The immediate pleasure or relief reinforces the entire habit loop, signaling to your brain, hey, this behavior is valuable. Do it again next time you see that cue. It's how your brain learns and automates.
Okay, so the cue triggers a craving, which then motivates a response, which provides a reward, satisfying the craving and ultimately becoming strongly associated with the initial cue.
Right.
And this endless feedback loop is just constantly running, often completely without our conscious awareness, which is exactly what makes habits so powerful and efficient for the brain.
Yeah.
But if they're so automatic, if they're running on autopilot, how do we ever gain control over them? How do we change something that's unconscious?
That's a really crucial point. The source emphasizes that our conscious mind is kind of the bottleneck of the brain. It can really only pay attention to one problem at a time. It processes information relatively slowly and deliberately. Habits, precisely because they become automatic, drastically reduce our cognitive load. They free up precious mental capacity, allowing us to allocate our attention to new challenges, creative thinking, or complex problem solving. But this very efficiency also makes them dangerous sometimes. You can easily fall into old, undesirable patterns before you even realize what's happening because your brain is just running the pre-programmed script on autopilot. The author gives some funny examples, like people who developed habits in one context, like a former preschool teacher who kept involuntarily asking her adult coworkers if they'd wash their hands, or a former lifeguard yelling "walk" at any child running near water,
even if it wasn't a pool. These habits persist mindlessly in totally inappropriate situations. For this very reason, awareness is the absolute critical first step in behavior change. Until you make the unconscious conscious, as Carl Jung famously suggested, it will direct your life and you'll just call it fate. You have to see the cues to even begin to change the response. The 4 laws of behavior change. A, the first law, make it obvious.
Right, and that brings us perfectly to the first law of behavior change. Make it obvious. The whole idea here is to make the cues for your desired habits so apparent, so visible, they're almost impossible to ignore. Our source provides a really fantastic example from the Japanese railway system called pointing and calling. What's that all about? And how does it help make habits so obvious and effective, especially for something as critical as safety?
Yeah, Shizukanko, or pointing and calling. It's a remarkably effective safety system used in Japan. As a train operator runs the train, they literally point at different objects, signals, speedometers, platform markers, and verbally call out commands or observations. For instance, when approaching a signal, they might point directly at it and loudly say, "Signal is green." When pulling into or out of stations, they point at the speedometer and call out the exact speed. "Speed check, 75 kilometers per hour." What this does is it externalizes their internal state. It moves a potentially non-conscious automatic check into a deeply conscious, deliberate action. By engaging multiple senses, their eyes see, their hands point, their mouths speak, their ears hear, they're far, far more likely to notice problems or deviations before something goes wrong. The author mentions his wife uses a similar technique when leaving for a trip, verbally calling out essential items. "Okay, got my keys, got my wallet, got my glasses, got my husband." It just makes those automatic behaviors more conscious and deliberate, less prone to error.
That's a great real-world application for safety and just heightened awareness. So for us, the listener, how can we use this principle to our advantage to become more aware of our own habits, both the good ones and maybe the bad ones that are just running on autopilot every day?
Well, the habit scorecard the author suggests is an excellent starting point for cultivating exactly that self-awareness. It's simple. Just make a list of your daily habits, everything from waking up to getting into bed. Include checking your phone, making coffee, brushing teeth, commuting, watching TV, everything. Then go through the list and mark each one as good, plus, bad, or neutral based on whether it serves your long-term goals. This simple act helps you become acutely aware of what you're actually doing with your time and energy and where your hidden cues might be lurking. Once you have that awareness, you can start proactively building good habits using 2 really powerful strategies he outlines. First, implementation intentions. This involves clearly stating when and where you will perform a new habit. Use this simple, actionable formula. I will behavior at time and location. For example, I'll meditate for 1 minute at 7 a.m. in my kitchen. Or I will exercise for 1 hour at 5 p.m. in my local gym. Or I will study Spanish for 15 minutes at 6:30 p.m. at my desk. This specificity is incredibly powerful because it overcomes vagueness, which is a major killer of new habits. It gives the habit a concrete time and space to live in the world, making the cue obvious. And with enough repetition, you'll start to feel an almost automatic urge to do the right thing at the right time. It works particularly well at fresh start moments, beginning of a week, month, or year, when hope is naturally higher. Second strategy is habit stacking. This cleverly links a new habit you want to form to an existing, already established one. The formula is straightforward. After current habit, I will new habit. For instance, after I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate for 60 seconds. Or after I take off my work shoes when I get home, I will immediately change into my workout clothes. The secret here is selecting the right cue and existing habit that already happens with the same frequency as your desired new habit. If you want to do a new habit every day, stack it onto a daily habit, once a week. Stack it on a weekly habit. This creates a clear, undeniable trigger for the new behavior by basically hijacking existing neural pathways.
Okay, so it's about giving your habits a clear time and a clear space, making them almost impossible to miss. But what about our physical environment? Our source talks a lot about redesigning our world to make the cues for good habits really obvious, and maybe the cues for bad habits invisible. This really turns our home, our workspace, into a powerful tool for habit formation, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, and this raises that important question. How can we shift from just being passive consumers of our environment to becoming the active architect of our lives? Because our environments are absolutely saturated with subtle cues that unconsciously nudge our behavior every single moment. So to make good habits obvious, you can strategically place triggers that prompt the desired action, like placing your pill bottle directly next to the faucet on the bathroom counter so you see it when you brush your teeth. Setting your guitar stand right in the middle of the living room to encourage practice. Keeping a stack of stationery on your desk, specifically for writing thank you notes. Even that famous example of Schiphol Airport, putting a sticker that looked like a fly inside the urinals to improve aim. Sounds silly, but it worked, reducing cleaning costs by 8%. These are powerful, obvious visual cues that prompt desired actions without requiring conscious thought or willpower. And conversely, to break bad habits, the strategy is to drastically reduce your exposure to their cues, make them invisible.
If you find yourself endlessly distracted by social media notifications while trying to work, okay, leave your phone in another room or turn off all non-essential notifications. If you waste too much time watching TV, maybe move the TV out of the bedroom. If you're spending too much money on impulse buys online, perhaps quit reading reviews of the latest tech gadgets or unsubscribe from those tempting marketing emails. This makes it significantly easier to practice self-restraint because you don't have to rely on willpower nearly as often. You've simply removed the initial trigger that starts the whole cycle. Once a habit is deeply encoded in your brain, the urge to act follows whenever the cue appears. Therefore, just trying to resist temptation through sheer willpower day after day is an incredibly ineffective and exhausting strategy in the long run. To put it bluntly, as the author says, you'll rarely stick to positive habits if you remain in an environment that constantly fuels negative ones.
That makes perfect sense. The more obviously available or present a product or a service or just a simple cue is, the more likely you are to engage with it. But what about the broader context of our environment? Can that also serve as a powerful cue, even if it's not a specific physical object?
Oh, absolutely. The context often is the cue. Our brains are incredibly adept at associating specific behaviors, not just with a single isolated trigger, but with the entire environment, the whole context surrounding that behavior. For example, there was a study with insomniacs. They were told to only go to bed when they felt tired and, critically, to get up and move to another room if they couldn't fall asleep within about 15 minutes. Over time, what happened? They started to associate the bed, the context of the bedroom, solely with sleeping, not with browsing their phones or watching TV or worrying about things. As a result, it became much easier for them to fall asleep quickly because their brains learned that sleeping was the primary action that happened in that specific room. The context itself became a powerful sleep trigger.
Huh. So if you're trying to build new habits or maybe break old ones, changing your overall environment or at least recontextualizing parts of it could be a major advantage. Like if you move to a new city, maybe your old bad habits don't follow you as strongly because the cues are different.
Precisely. A new place, even just a different coffee shop to do your writing, or a specific bench in the park where you always read, or even just a different corner of your existing room designated solely for studying. It helps you escape those subtle triggers and cues that constantly nudge you toward your current, perhaps undesirable habits. It's often much easier to associate a new habit with a new, fresh context than it is to try and build a new habit right in the face of all the competing cues from your old familiar environment. Now, if you can't get to an entirely new environment, you can still strategically redefine or rearrange your current one. The mantra the author suggests here is one space, one use. He explains how having a dedicated separate office, rather than working from his couch or the kitchen table, made it significantly easier for him to switch between work mode and personal life mode. Mixing contexts often mixes habits, and unfortunately, the easier or more deeply ingrained ones usually win out in that battle. A stable environment where everything has a designated place and a clear purpose strongly encourages stable and predictable behaviors that align with your goals. B. The second law, make it attractive.
All right, this is where we get into the magnetic pull of habits. The second law is all about making it attractive. We've touched on dopamine's role in craving already, but how does the science of attraction, and particularly this powerful wanting system in our brains, play into making our desired habits more compelling, more irresistible even?
Yeah, what's truly fascinating here is how our brains are wired for this. As we discussed, habits are essentially a dopamine-driven feedback loop. And dopamine's primary role, remember, is about anticipation and desire, not just the experience of pleasure itself. This wanting system, rooted deep in our evolutionary past, pushes us relentlessly to seek out resources vital for survival: food, water, social connection. And now, in the modern world, it pushes us towards modern rewards like money, social media likes, new information, status, you name it. The greater that predicted reward, the bigger the dopamine spike, making us incredibly motivated to act. It's why just thinking about that sugary treat or imagining the notifications waiting on your phone can feel almost as powerful and compelling as actually consuming it or checking it. Our brains are always on the hunt for the next potentially pleasurable experience, and we can actually leverage this powerful drive.
So our brains are essentially hardwired for wanting, maybe even more than liking. Given this really powerful drive for anticipation, how can we deliberately hack this system to make good habits, which might sometimes feel a bit mundane or effortful, significantly more attractive?
Well, one remarkably powerful method the author details is called temptation bundling. This strategy ingeniously involves pairing an action you want to do, something inherently enjoyable and desirable for you, with an action you need to do, the habit you're trying to build but maybe find less appealing. Our source gives this brilliant example of Ronan Byrne, an electrical engineering student over in Dublin. He loved watching Netflix, but he knew he desperately needed to exercise more. So what did he do? He hacked a stationary bike. He hooked it up to his laptop and TV so that Netflix would only run if he was cycling at a certain minimum speed. If he slowed down too much, the show would automatically pause. He brilliantly bundled his exercise, the need, with watching Netflix, the want, making the exercise vastly more attractive and engaging for him.
That's absolutely brilliant. So the habit stacking formula we just talked about, that after current habit, I will new habit. Now it has like a supercharged version that includes a temptation bundle.
Yes, exactly. It becomes a combined, much more potent strategy. The formula looks like this. 1. After current habit, I will have it I need. 2. After habit I need, I will have it I want. Co. So, for example, let's say you want to keep up with current events by reading the news, the want. But you also know you need to cultivate more gratitude in your life, the need. You can structure it like this. After I get my morning coffee, current habit, I will say one thing I'm grateful for that happened yesterday, habit I need. After I say one thing I'm grateful for, I will read the news, habit I want. This creates a heightened, much more attractive version of the new habit by immediately following the need with something you already desire, effectively using that powerful wanting system to your advantage.
Okay, beyond these individual preferences and the inner workings of dopamine, our source discusses the incredibly seductive pull of social norms. We are, at our core, herd animals, right? Driven by this deep, fundamental desire to belong and fit in with the tribe. How profoundly does this influence our habits, maybe sometimes without us even realizing it?
Oh, profoundly. This raises an incredibly important question. How much do we truly choose our earliest habits versus simply imitating the people around us? Humans are fundamentally wired for social connection. From an evolutionary perspective, being separated from the tribe, being ostracized, was basically a death sentence. As Charles Darwin himself noted, it was the species that learned to collaborate and improvise most effectively that prevailed. As a result, one of our deepest human desires is simply to belong, to be accepted, to earn approval from our peers. And this ancient preference exerts a powerful, often invisible influence on our modern behavior every single day. We instinctively, unconsciously, follow the script handed down by our friends, our family, our community. These social norms are often the unwritten, unspoken rules guiding our behavior constantly, and we tend to imitate the habits of 3 specific groups in particular. First, the close. We imitate the habits of people who are closest to us, our family members and our friends. This is why peer pressure is so incredibly potent, for better or for worse. For example, studies show if your friends smoke, you are significantly more likely to smoke yourself. If your partner has a habit of starting a new fitness program, you're more likely to join in. Our behavior is profoundly influenced by those we spend the most time with. It's like a shared social gravity pulls us along. Second, the many. We imitate the habits of the majority, the herd. When we're faced with uncertainty, when we're not sure what to do, we instinctively look to the group for guidance. This is why we check reviews on Amazon or Yelp before making a purchase, right? There's this powerful evidence in numbers effect. We assume, often subconsciously, that if everyone else is doing it, it must be the right thing to do, or at least the acceptable thing. However, and this is a really crucial point, the normal behavior of the tribe can often overpower the desired behavior of the individual, even if the individual knows better. For instance, one study found that a chimpanzee, upon joining a new group, would actually adopt a less effective nut-cracking method just to blend in, even if it had previously learned a superior method. Humans are very similar. There's tremendous internal pressure to comply with group norms, even if those norms are suboptimal for achieving our individual goals. And third, the powerful. We imitate the habits of people we envy or admire, those individuals who have high status in our eyes. We are naturally drawn to behaviors that earn respect, approval, admiration, and status. Think about how quickly certain fashion trends, communication styles, or even business strategies spread once they're adopted by a high-status individual or a leading company. We copy the exercise routines of athletes we admire, or the morning routines of successful CEOs we read about because we subconsciously desire their success and their status. High-status people enjoy approval, respect, and praise, which makes their habits seem highly attractive and worthy of imitation. It signals a pathway to what we aspire to achieve ourselves.
Right. So to make a good habit really attractive, you can either actively work to make it a social norm within your existing peer group, or maybe even more powerfully, you can strategically join a new group where your desired behavior is already the established norm. Like if everyone in your running club runs daily, then running daily becomes not just attractive, but almost effortless because it's just what the tribe does, and that deep desire to belong kicks in and helps you stick with it. C, the third law, make it easy. Okay, this brings us to the third law, which is all about removing friction. Make it easy. Our source introduces something called the law of least effort, and it sounds like a really fundamental principle of human nature. What exactly does that mean for our habits? And how does it explain why we often just gravitate towards certain actions, often the less productive ones, without even thinking about it?
Yeah, it's a profound observation about us. The law of least effort basically states that human behavior naturally, almost inevitably, gravitates toward the option that requires the least amount of physical or mental work in the moment. This is a foundational principle, and you see it everywhere. From the spread of agriculture thousands of years ago, where crops and domesticated animals spread much more easily along east-west axes because the climates were similar, requiring less effort to adapt, all the way to the design of modern products and services we use every day. If a habit requires too much energy, too much friction, too many steps, it's just exhausting. And because it's exhausting, it's unlikely to stick in the long run. We're fundamentally wired to conserve energy. For example, doing one push-up per day requires almost no energy to get started, right? That makes it far more likely to actually occur than setting a goal of doing 100 push-ups right off the bat. Much of your daily life is filled with behaviors that arise simply because they require the least amount of conscious thought or immediate effort compared to the alternatives.
So the ultimate goal here then is to make the desired action, the positive habit you want to build, as utterly easy and friction-free as humanly possible.
Yes, exactly. And this is where environment design comes back into play again. But this time, the focus is specifically on optimizing for ease of action, not just cue visibility. Think about choosing a gym that's directly on your commute path home from work. You're significantly more likely to actually go if it's not out of your way, right? If it doesn't add extra steps, extra travel time, extra decisions. Even more effective, often, is reducing friction within your home or your immediate workspace. Our source highlights how Japanese television manufacturers back in the 1970s completely redesigned their assembly line workspaces to eliminate every single wasted motion reaching too far for a tool, bending down unnecessarily, walking extra steps. This was an addition by subtraction strategy. By subtracting wasted effort, they added significantly to their efficiency, their output, their customer satisfaction, and ultimately their revenue. Similarly, when we systematically remove the little points of friction that sap our time and energy throughout the day, we can achieve far more with less effort and, crucially, less reliance on willpower, which is always a finite resource.
And we see this principle applied everywhere in successful products and services today, don't we? I mean, think about meal delivery services or dating apps or ride-sharing platforms like Uber and Lyft. They all succeed precisely because they remove little bits of friction for their users, making otherwise complex or time-consuming tasks incredibly easy.
Absolutely. What's truly fascinating here is how the most successful companies meticulously design their products and services to automate, eliminate, or drastically simplify steps for the user. They obsess over removing friction. Consider voice-activated speakers like Google Home or Amazon Echo. Why are they popular? Because saying "play my workout playlist" is easier than pulling out your phone, unlocking it, opening a music app, searching for the playlist, and then hitting a play. It removes several steps. The entire business world, in many ways, is just this never-ending quest to deliver the same, or even better, results in an ever easier fashion for the consumer. Governments also apply this principle, for example, by making things like voter registration or organ donation an opt-out system instead of opt-in. This significantly increases participation rates simply because doing nothing, the default option, is the easiest path. It consistently underscores the immense power of designing for ease and reducing friction at every single touch point.
This naturally leads to a really powerful strategy the author calls priming the environment for future use. What does this mean exactly? And what does resetting the room specifically entail in this context?
Yeah, priming the environment means proactively setting up your surroundings so that your desired future action is as easy as possible to initiate when the time comes. You're basically doing your future self a favor. Oswald Knuckles, an IT developer mentioned in the book, perfectly embodies this with his habit of resetting the room after each use. He doesn't just clean up for the sake of tidiness. He does it specifically to prepare the environment to make the next desired action effortless. For instance, after watching television, he immediately places the remote back on the TV stand, arranges the pillows neatly, folds the blanket. Whenever he takes a shower, he uses the time while the water is warming up to quickly wipe down the toilet. He calls this being proactively lazy, which is a great phrase. It actually gives you time back and conserves future energy by significantly reducing friction for future you. So if you want to cook a healthy breakfast tomorrow morning, lay out the skillet, the cutting board, maybe chop the vegetables the night before. If you want to exercise first thing, set out your workout clothes, your shoes, your gym bag, right by your bed before you go to sleep. This primes the environment for immediate use, making those desired actions effortless entry points for your habits.
I love that. This beautifully highlights how habits can be the entry point, not the end point, as the author says. It's about making it easy to start. And speaking of effortless entry points, our source introduces the 2-minute rule. This sounds incredibly simple, maybe almost too simple to be effective.
It truly is that simple, and yet it's deceptively powerful. The rule states, quite simply, when you start a new habit, it should take less than 2 minutes to do. That's it. And nearly any habit, any big goal, can be scaled down into a 2-minute version. Read before bed each night becomes read 1 page. Do 30 minutes of yoga becomes take out my yoga mat. Study for class becomes open my notes. Fold the laundry becomes fold 1 pair of socks. Run 3 miles becomes put on my running shoes. The core idea is to make the initial actions so incredibly small and easy that it becomes almost mindless to start. It's about ritualizing the beginning of a larger routine. Toyla Tharp, the famous choreographer, had a ritual. Her workout habit started the moment she hailed a cab outside her apartment each morning to go to the gym. That was the non-negotiable start. The point is just to make it easy to start, because once you initiate the momentum, the rest of the action often follows much more naturally. You overcome the initial inertia.
But I imagine many listeners might be thinking, okay, but what if I know the real goal is much more than 2 minutes? Kind of feels like I'm tricking myself, doesn't it? And that seems maybe unsustainable or somehow less genuine if I only do a tiny fraction of what I really intend to do.
Yeah, it's a very common and very valid thought. It could feel like cheating. But the profound suggestion from the author here is to genuinely aim to do it for just 2 minutes. And then, if you truly feel like stopping after that, allow yourself to stop. No guilt. Go for a run, but commit that you must stop after just 2 minutes. Start meditating, but you must stop after 2 minutes. One reader mentioned in the book used this exact strategy, just showing up at the gym for 5 minutes consistently, to lose over 100 pounds eventually. He consistently did less than he hoped initially, but he always showed up. The underlying logic here is really profound. It's always, always better to do less than you hoped than to do nothing at all. Consistency beats intensity in the long run. The real aim of the 2-minute rule isn't necessarily the 2 minutes itself. It's to master the habit of showing up. Once the habit of showing up is firmly established, once you're consistently performing that initial 2-minute action without fail, then you can use what the author calls habit shaping to gradually increase the duration or intensity over time.
But the primary focus always remains on mastering those first 2 minutes, because showing up, even for just a short time, consistently reaffirms your identity as the type of person who performs that habit. It builds the critical foundation. D, the 4th law. Make it satisfying.
Okay, this brings us to the crucial 4th and final law. Make it satisfying. Our source opens the section with a really fascinating story about a public health worker named Stephen Luby in Karachi, Pakistan, and the incredibly complex challenge of encouraging consistent hand washing, even though people intellectually knew it was important for health.
Yeah, what's fascinating there is the sheer scale of the problem he was facing. Karachi is this incredibly densely populated city with, unfortunately, poor sanitation infrastructure, leading to widespread illness, especially among children. Luby and his team realized that while people generally understood the importance of hand washing for preventing disease, consistency was the fundamental problem. People would wash haphazardly, maybe forget entirely, or just not do it properly. Knowledge alone clearly wasn't enough to drive sustained behavior change. That's when Luby had this insight and partnered with Procter & Gamble. They agreed to supply Safeguard soap to the communities, which was actually considered a premium, desirable product in that region at the time. Now, this soap wasn't just functional. It was designed to be enjoyable. It foamed easily, it smelled really great, and it simply felt pleasurable to use. Hand washing transformed from a mundane chore into something slightly more enjoyable, a little daily luxury almost.
Yeah.
And the results were truly remarkable. Within just months, child health improved dramatically across the community. Rates of diarrhea, pneumonia, skin infections plummeted. Why? Because people actually started to enjoy the process of washing their hands, making the behavior satisfying in the moment. It powerfully illustrates that behavior change is infinitely easier and more sustainable when it's genuinely enjoyable, or at least immediately satisfying in some way.
Right, so it's about making the actual experience satisfying, even for something as seemingly mundane as washing your hands. But why is this immediate satisfaction so incredibly critical, especially when so many good habits like exercising or saving money or learning an instrument have delayed rewards, while so many bad habits offer that instant gratification? It really feels like our brains are kind of working against us here.
They kind of are. And this raises an incredibly important point about what the author calls the cardinal rule of behavior change. It states, very simply, what is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided. Our brains evolved over millennia to prioritize immediate rewards over delayed ones. This is a fundamental biological bias wired deep within us for survival reasons. Think about it. Eating junk food feels good now, right? It delivers immediate pleasure, a quick dopamine hit, but it leads to bad health outcomes much later in the future. Exercising often feels hard now, demanding immediate effort and maybe discomfort, but it leads to good health outcomes later. The costs of your good habits are typically felt in the present, while the benefits are delayed. Conversely, the benefits of your bad habits are often immediate, while the costs are conveniently deferred to some point in the future. This fundamental misalignment between immediate and delayed outcomes is one of the single biggest challenges we face when trying to achieve sustained behavior change. It's precisely why we struggle so often.
Okay, so how do we bridge this gap? How do we hack our own biology, essentially, to make those long-term good habits feel immediately satisfying, especially when their true payoff might be months or even years down the road, seemingly totally out of reach right now?
Well, the best way to train ourselves to bridge this gap, to learn to delay gratification more effectively, is to intentionally add a little bit of immediate pleasure or a tangible immediate reward to the habits that pay off in the long run. We can't always make the process itself inherently delightful, like the safeguard soap example, but we can absolutely make the act of completing the habit immediately satisfying. We need to give ourselves a little win right away. One really powerful method for this is visual reinforcement through habit tracking. Simply seeing a streak of completed habits like crossing off days on a calendar, filling in squares on a spreadsheet, or watching a progress bar fill up in an app is inherently motivating for most people. It serves multiple purposes. It's a visual cue that reminds you to act. It clearly shows your progress, which feels good, and it feels deeply satisfying just to record another successful instance to make that mark. Every check mark on your calendar is like casting another vote for the type of person you wish to become, and seeing that tally grow provides immediate, delightful gratification. This makes the process of doing the habit satisfying, not just the eventual far-off outcome. It reinforces your identity in the moment. Another clever method is creating loyalty programs for yourself. Imagine you want to save money for something exciting like a trip to Europe fund or a new camera fund. Whenever you successfully skip a bad habit that saves you money, maybe you resist eating out for lunch, or you don't buy that impulse gadget online, you immediately transfer the money you saved, say $20 or $50, into that dedicated savings account. This makes doing nothing, or specifically avoiding a bad habit, immediately rewarding in a tangible way. You see your Europe trip fund growing right away, which feels much better and more concrete than simply feeling deprived of a meal out or a new toy. The reward is tangible and immediate, even if the ultimate goal, the trip, is still delayed.
Oh, I love that. This makes it satisfying to do nothing, or maybe more accurately, not do a bad habit, which is incredibly powerful. It transforms passive avoidance into active, rewarding progress. But the source also wisely warns about choosing these short-term rewards carefully. We need to make sure they reinforce our desired identity and long-term goals rather than conflicting with them. What does that look like in practice?
That's a really crucial distinction, because you absolutely don't want to send mixed signals to your brain, undermining your own efforts. If your immediate reward for exercising is indulging in a large bowl of ice cream, you're essentially reinforcing two conflicting identities simultaneously. I am someone who works out, and also I am someone who eats unhealthy food. It creates cognitive dissonance. Instead, choose a short-term reward that aligns perfectly with your long-term vision and your desired identity. For example, a relaxing massage after a tough week of workouts reinforces self-care and aligns beautifully with a healthy identity. Similarly, if your goal is financial independence, Maybe your reward for consistently sticking to your budget isn't buying a new, unnecessary jacket, which conflicts with the goal, but perhaps allowing yourself a leisurely walk in nature, an uninterrupted hour of reading your favorite book, or a luxurious bubble bath experiences that symbolize greater freedom, peace, and well-being, aligning with the deeper reasons why you're budgeting in the first place. The goal is always for the immediate reward to be perfectly aligned with your long-term vision and the identity you're trying to build. Eventually, intrinsic rewards like feeling healthier, having more energy, experiencing reduced stress, gaining increased self-confidence will naturally take over and become the primary drivers. But that initial immediate reinforcement is absolutely critical for cementing the habit and getting it off the ground successfully. Advanced tactics for mastery, from good to great.
Okay, so we've laid a really solid foundation for habit formation using those 4 laws. Now our source takes us into more advanced territory. How do we go from just being good at forming habits to truly mastering them and achieving, well, maybe even greatness in our chosen field? This section tackles the often misunderstood truth about talent and the significant yet often subtle role that our genes play. It sounds like a pretty complex topic, especially since genes seem to influence so much of who we are.
It is indeed complex, and it's a point of immense fascination and sometimes debate. What's really striking here is that while our genes undeniably influence virtually everything about us, from our core personality traits, like those widely accepted Big Five, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and eroticism, to our likelihood of developing certain addictions, our natural physical attributes, or even how we respond physiologically to stress, they absolutely do not determine our destiny. They predispose, yes, but they don't predetermine. We're all born with unique genetic predispositions that simply make certain behaviors, certain skills, certain ways of thinking easier or more natural for us than others. For example, someone born with a naturally high level of conscientiousness might find it inherently easier to adopt habits of organization and discipline compared to someone lower on that trait. The crucial question then becomes, how do you strategically find the game, or the specific set of habits, challenges, and environments where the odds are inherently stacked in your favor, where your natural strengths, your genetic predispositions can truly shine and propel you towards mastery, rather than constantly fighting against your own nature.
Right. This sounds like deliberately picking the right habits and the right environments based on your unique strengths, rather than just trying to force yourself into something that's always going to feel like a constant uphill battle against your own innate tendencies.
Exactly that. The first step, as we discussed with the third law, is making it easy by choosing habits that aren't overly difficult to initiate. But in the long run, for true mastery, and importantly for sustained motivation over years, you absolutely need to be playing the right game for your unique skill set and genetic predispositions. Now, the most common approach people take to finding this is often just random trial and error, which frankly can be incredibly inefficient and discouraging. Our author suggests the more deliberate approach. He introduces the concept of the explore-exploit trade-off. You start with a deliberate period of exploration. You try out many different possibilities. You research a broad range of ideas, skills, or potential fields. Think about it like dating multiple people before settling down, or studying liberal arts in college to get exposure to various disciplines, or in business running A/B split tests on different marketing approaches. The goal is to cast a wide net initially, gather information, experience different things firsthand. Once you find something that truly resonates, something where you genuinely feel alive, where you feel like the real me, and the author notes this feeling often comes without internal judgments or the need for people-pleasing, then you shift gears into exploiting that best solution. You focus intensely on consistent practice, deliberate refinement, and deepening your expertise in that area. That feeling of authenticity and effortless flow is a powerful internal indicator that you're headed in the right direction, that you've found a game where your innate strengths are valuable assets. And then there's this incredibly powerful idea of creating your own game. If you simply can't find an existing game, an existing field or niche where the odds seem stacked in your favor, you don't just give up, you actively create one. This often involves combining your unique skills, passions, and interests in novel and unexpected ways. The author provides his own personal example. Back in college, he realized he wasn't naturally brilliant enough to truly stand out among the top physics majors or the top biology majors. He wasn't going to be the best in those established games. So what did he do? He designed his own interdisciplinary major, biomechanics, which was a unique combination of physics, chemistry, biology, and anatomy. Because this combination genuinely suited him, studying felt less like a chore and more like a natural, engaging pursuit. He cleverly avoided the trap of direct comparison in crowded fields and instead found his own unique niche. Specialization, or even better, the creative combination of specializations, is a remarkably powerful way to overcome potential genetic disadvantages. You essentially rewrite the rules of the game to suit you. You end up working hard, yes, but you're working hard on things that already come relatively easily or naturally to you, which dramatically amplifies your leverage and potential for mastery. Think about someone who is, say, a brilliant photographer and also has a deep, nerdy passion for local history. They could carve out a totally unique and valuable niche as a historical architecture photographer, a game where their combined skills give them a distinct edge that a pure photographer or a pure historian might not possess.
That makes a lot of sense. This leads to another critical concept for sustaining motivation on this long journey from good to great, the Goldilocks rule. This sounds very intuitive, finding the challenge that's just right, not too hard, not too easy.
It is intuitive, and it's strongly backed by psychology. The Goldilocks rule states that humans experience peak motivation, peak engagement, when we're working on tasks that are right on the edge of our current abilities. Not so easy that we get bored, and not so impossibly hard that we get overwhelmed and discouraged, but just right. Challenging, but achievable with effort. Think about playing tennis against someone who is roughly your equal. You win some points, you lose some points. You have a good chance of winning the match, but only if you truly apply yourself and try hard. In those situations, your focus naturally narrows, distractions fade away, and you become fully invested, fully immersed in the task. This is often related to the psychological state of flow. It corresponds to the Yerkes-Dodson law, which describes this optimal level of arousal needed for peak performance, somewhere perfectly balanced between boredom and anxiety. Steve Martin, the legendary comedian, is cited as an excellent example of managing this. Early in his career, he would gradually expand his stand-up routine, always adding new, untested material to push his boundaries, a challenge. But he would also carefully keep a few reliable jokes in the set that were guaranteed laughs, the reassurance of success. This provided just enough victories and positive reinforcement to keep him motivated, and just enough mistakes and challenges from the new material to keep him working hard, constantly refining his craft. It's finding and maintaining that sweet spot of manageable difficulty that fuels long-term engagement and improvement.
But what happens when you inevitably hit that point of boredom? Even in the Goldilocks zone, things can become routine. Our source makes a strong claim here, suggesting that boredom is perhaps the greatest villain on the quest for self-improvement, maybe even more so than outright failure. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is a bold statement, and yet it resonates as a profound truth for anyone who's pursued mastery in any field. This raises that important question. What truly differentiates the absolute best athletes, the top artists, the most successful entrepreneurs from everyone else who starts with similar talent or ambition? It's often not some bottomless well of passion or feeling amped up and motivated about their goals every single day. As one elite weightlifting coach apparently told the author, at some point, it really just comes down to who can handle the sheer boredom of training every single day, doing the same lifts, the same drills, over and over and over again, long after the initial excitement has faded. Successful people feel the same lack of motivation sometimes, the same urge to procrastinate, the same soul-crushing monotony as everyone else. The difference is they still find a way to show up. They stick to the schedule. Professionals stick to the schedule. They do the work, even when the mood isn't right, even when the work isn't exciting anymore. Amateurs, conversely, tend to let life and their fluctuating moods get in the way. They wait for inspiration to strike, which is unreliable. If a skill is truly important to you, you have to be willing to stick with it in any mood, through any level of boredom. You have to, in a sense, fall in love with the boredom. You have to embrace the repetition. Because the only way to become truly excellent at anything is often to be endlessly fascinated by doing the same thing over and over again, consistently, refining it millimeter by millimeter, year after year.
Wow, so it really comes down to consistency, even when it's not exciting, even when it's just the daily grind. But okay, once habits do become automatic, that can lead to its own problem.
Right.
Mindless repetition, right? Where you stop paying attention and maybe even let subtle mistakes creep in, or you just stop improving. How do we ensure we keep getting better and don't just stagnate or let our skills degrade once a habit is ingrained?
That's the other side of the coin, isn't it? To counteract that very real danger of mindless repetition and ensure continuous ongoing improvement, we absolutely need a system for regular reflection and review. We need to keep paying attention. The source mentions how Los Angeles Lakers coach Pat Riley, back in the 80s, famously tracked not just points and rebounds, but a player's championship effort, CBE stats. He focused on quantifying incremental improvements in things like diving for loose balls, getting assists, setting effective screens, the less glamorous parts of the game. This allowed for continuous, targeted feedback and improvement on the micro level, preventing complacency. Comedian Chris Rock is another example. He meticulously tests new jokes in small clubs dozens, sometimes hundreds of times. He brings a notepad, records which bits land, which ones fall flat, where he needs to make adjustments, tweaking wording, timing, delivery, before those killer lines eventually form the backbone of his polished new show. He's constantly reflecting and refining. Executives might keep decision journals to record major choices they make, their reasoning at the time, and the expected outcomes. Then they review these journals later to learn objectively from both successes and, perhaps even more importantly, from their mistakes. Improvement isn't just about forming habits initially. It's about constantly fine-tuning them, remaining aware of small errors or suboptimal patterns, and continuously seeking ways to get that extra 1% better, even in areas where you feel you've already achieved mastery. You need that feedback loop.
And finally, there's a really crucial point about identity and flexibility. What happens when your life circumstances change dramatically and your core identity feels wrapped up in something that no longer applies? Like being a great soldier after you leave the military or the CEO after you retire. This can lead to a profound sense of loss, maybe even a crisis of identity, because who you were feels like it's no longer who you are.
That's a very real and often painful challenge many people face, potentially leading to identity loss and a feeling of fragility, of not knowing who you are anymore. The key here for sustained long-term well-being and the ability to adapt gracefully to life's inevitable changes is to cultivate the skill of redefining yourself flexibly. So instead of a brittle, rigid identity like I'm an athlete, maybe think more broadly, I'm the type of person who is mentally tough and loves a physical challenge. This allows your identity to adapt gracefully to changing circumstances. If an injury prevents you from competing in your chosen sport, you can still embody that core identity through new physical pursuits, maybe coaching, maybe a different kind of fitness. Instead of I'm a great soldier, perhaps transform that core identity into something like I'm the type of person who is disciplined, reliable, and a great team player. Traits that can be applied in countless new contexts. Or I'm the CEO could translate more flexibly into I'm the type of person who builds and creates things, who empowers others, and who enjoys solving complex problems. This kind of flexible redefinition allows your core identity to flow and adapt to changing circumstances, much like water flowing around an obstacle, as the Tao Te Ching beautifully suggests. Your identity becomes stable and resilient, not brittle and prone to shattering when circumstances change. It allows you to maintain the important positive aspects of who you are, even if your specific roles or life situations shift dramatically over time. It's really about detaching your sense of self from specific titles or outcomes and embracing the underlying traits and values instead. Outro.
Wow. This has been an incredibly detailed and I think really practical deep dive into the world of habits. We've gone all the way from the surprising compounding power of that tiny 1% improvement right down to the deep psychological mechanisms of cues and cravings, and then landed on these truly actionable step-by-step strategies for making our habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. It feels like a complete toolkit.
Indeed. We've seen how transforming your environment, understanding and maybe leveraging social influence, embracing that profound law of least effort, and even learning to appreciate or at least tolerate the often uncelebrated boredom of consistent practice can fundamentally reshape not just your daily life, but your entire long-term trajectory. It really is about building robust systems that make success almost inevitable over time, rather than solely relying on willpower, which we know is fleeting. And remembering that key distinction. Desire might initiate the action, but it's pleasure or satisfaction that truly sustains it in the long run.
And for you, our listener, remember that crucial distinction. Desire initiates, but pleasure sustains. And it's truly amazing, isn't it, how our brains operate on autopilot so much of the time, allowing us to not be consciously aware of every single cue for a habit to begin, which is both its immense power, saving our conscious energy for new challenges, and also its subtle danger, making us susceptible to falling back into old, undesirable patterns without even noticing.
Absolutely. And that raises, I think, an important final question for you to consider as we wrap up. Knowing now how profoundly these tiny, consistent actions and the environments we meticulously create for ourselves literally shape who we become. What is one single, almost effortless, decisive moment you could design into your day, starting maybe right now or tomorrow morning? One tiny action that would cast a vote for the person you truly wish to be. And critically, how could you make that vote, that small action, immediately satisfying right then and there? Think about that 1% improvement, because as we've explored today, over time it really will compound into something magnificent.